I mean, this may be the concluding question. People have remarked that the world you've created is a little bit melancholy and dark. And I guess my view is maybe it's melancholy and dark because violence is a solution to most problems, and there's not really much of a civilizing force of laws. And this is, maybe you're just going to tell me read and find out, but is there anything hopeful on the horizon for the people of Westeros in terms of making their world less dark? I know that winter is coming.
Well, yeah, winter is coming. So it'll probably get darker before it gets lighter. However, my work has always had a certain amount of melancholy to it. I mean, if you go all the way back to my earliest published stories in the 70s, I think you'll find that trend. It's just something about...
Well, you're a Jets fan, so...
About yes, that may be part of it. Yes, we've been cursed ever since Joe Namath. But, I mean, fiction is about conflict and is about dark periods. No one goes out and reads the book about the happy, peaceful family living in happy, peaceful times. I mean, what is that? You're going to write a fantasy cheaper by the dozen or something? Having adventures. Oh, we burned the chicken. How will I say, Father, that I lamed his horse? I mean, it's I don't know. Yeah, I suppose people will be entertained by that, but I think certainly ever since Tolkien, and probably even before, there's a dramatic intensity to fantasy that requires a certain amount of darkness.
Apocalypse is what I think of. The apocalypse is always on the horizon.
Now, mine is darker than some ways, I think, because I have tried to make it a little more realistic. I mean, people who complain that my world is too dark, clearly have never read much about the real Middle Ages. I mean, the things that go on in Westeros are nothing compared to some of the things that went on in the real Middle Ages, in terms of rape and torment and slaughter and torture. It was not a happy time in the Middle Ages. The Black Death, I haven't even gotten into the Black Death yet. That was a fun time. But I did want to do more than... I mean, I see... Not so much these days, actually, because I think there is a realistic movement going on in fantasy. But if you go back to the 70s and the 80s, a lot of the fantasies that were being published then that were very popular were set in sort of a Disney Middle Ages, a Ren Fair Middle Ages, where, you had kings and you had lords, and they were fighting with swords and stuff, but castles were all very clean, and it was Disneyland's, It was they had all the titles, but they didn't have any of the nasty realities of the class system. You'd always get the scene where the spunky peasant boy tells off the spoiled princess. That doesn't happen in real. The spunky peasant boy who tells off the spoiled princess soon loses his spunky peasant tongue, and then his spunky peasant head is impaled upon a spike. That's how the class system worked back then.
And then the princess has been violated in every which way, and then she's killed too. Does it make you, angry is probably the wrong word, but frustrated that your books are sold next to Disneyland in the same aisle? Do you think...
No, because there's always, no matter where you are in the bookstore, there's going to be good books with you, and there's going to be bad books with you. I mean, my books are sold in the same section as Tolkien, and that's high praise indeed. He was one of the most significant authors of the 20th century, and I'm immensely flattered anytime I'm mentioned in the same breath with him. He was an author that I read, of course, when I was young, and had a huge, huge impact on me. My work is very different from his work, but I'm pleased to be in the same section as him.
Did you like the movies?
Yes, I did.
After you watch the movies, I've had a problem, maybe you don't have it, but I can no longer read the books in the same way. The visual images from the movies have made it almost impossible for me to enjoy the books. I go back and I read the books.
That's a danger.
Yeah, I go back and I can't have the imagination anymore. It's gone. It's replaced by, images of Liv Tyler.
But isn't that true of any movie that's made into a book?
Yeah.
That's made into a movie, rather? I mean, if you pick up Dashiell Hammett's Maltese Falcon,
right,
aren't you going to see Humphrey Bogart?
Right. Right, but the thing that sort of seems sad about it is that so much of Tolkien is your imagination.
Well, you can still enjoy your own version of Tom Bombadil.
Ha! Well, that's totally true. So here's maybe a little bit of a different question. Why is it that almost all of the sort of the fantasy novels are medieval? I mean, frankly, within some sort of range. Is that a Tolkien thing, or is it the most natural period of time for magic to have ever existed? Why not? I don't know. Roman period fantasy novel. I mean, they do exist, but it's not.
Well, this is a question a lot of fantasy writers and critics have asked over the years. You're not the first one to ask this. And ultimately, I mean, not only is it medieval, it's specifically Western medieval. It's specifically Western Europe, roughly from the Dark Ages through the High Middle Ages.
Right.
By the time you start getting into Renaissance, less so, and certainly not much of the later periods. It's not universal. People have tried to do other things. People have tried to do fantasies that are roughly based on Chinese or Japanese medieval periods. Even them, that particular flavor. People have done Renaissance analogs, even later things where people have muskets and blunderbusses and big pistols, Three Musketeers kind of stuff in a fantasy setting.
Right.
So all of this stuff has been done, and some of it has been done quite well. But the one thing that, of course, publishers have not failed to notice, and writers have not noticed either, is none of these other things sell nearly as well as the medieval period. So it's ultimately the readers who make this determination, because, of course, every writer wants, he wants to make great art, but he also wants to have many, many, many readers who will be buying his books, so he can.
You got a theory on why it is?
I don't. I mean, I think our Middle Ages is more interesting to our readership than the Chinese or Japanese Middle Ages, simply because it's our common cultural heritage. We all grow up hearing stories of King Arthur and Robin Hood.
Right.
So we're more interested in King Arthur than we are in the samurai on some very primal level. We're getting stories that are similar to the stories we heard in our childhood. But then that doesn't explain some other things. Like we also hear stories about the Three Musketeers and the Old West and gunslingers and all that. So why don't we have fantasy westerns kind of thing?
Well, Stephen King had some series. I think his Dark Materials. No, not his Dark Materials. That's something else entirely. The Dark Tower series.
Dark Tower, yeah, the Gunslinger, the last Gunslinger, yeah.
Yeah, which sort of is that. But I think, you're just generally right that the trope doesn't really speak to folks.